and welcome to the Just Not Science podcast video series. Today we're going to be talking about the different types of treatments that are available for coronavirus. And instead of just watching me talk, I have my Titan Destiny shirt on, so I figured it might be a little fun to have some Destiny 2 gameplay in the background, just so it's a little more interesting to watch. Today we're going to be talking about COVID-19 and some potential treatment options. At the time of recording, there are over 1.6 million confirmed cases of COVID-19 worldwide, and nearly 1/3 of those cases are in the US alone. With most diseases, doctors look to treat the source of the illness as well as treat symptoms. In the case of the flu, people will often take things like Robitussin or Sudafed. These over-the-counter medications don't actually treat the underlying infection, they just relieve some of your symptoms, which makes us feel better. Doctors typically don't provide medications to kill the virus responsible for the flu. They usually just advise rest and fluids. Part of the reason is because the medications that people will get for the flu are either expensive or they come with side effects, and honestly, they don't really decrease the duration in which you have the flu. All it does is take time and money out of your pocket. So they usually, like I said, advise rest and fluids, but the coronavirus is different from the flu. One person with COVID can infect twice as many people than someone who has the flu. Also, the mortality rate for COVID is about 3 to 4% compared to the 0.1% of the flu. As a result, treating COVID at the source becomes much more important. So, what treatments do we have for COVID? Well, the short answer is none. There are currently no approved medications outlined by the CDC to treat or prevent COVID infections. However, tons of laboratories and pharmaceutical companies are racing to find a treatment. There's a short-term, long-term, and what I call a long-term option. Let's start with short-term. Convalescent plasma. This is plasma from people who were infected with COVID and survived. What is plasma? Well, plasma is basically just the water component of blood. It makes up about 55% of our actual blood, and it contains things like sugars, the proteins and antibodies that you would find in your bloodstream. So now this person who was infected, their body has made antibodies against COVID. So if we can pull the antibodies out and give it to another person, we can give them a type of immunity. This is called passive immunity, and it's great for treating patients in the short term. However, it doesn't provide long-term benefits. And when I say it's great for treating patients in the short term, I mean historically. We're not really sure how effective it is at treating COVID. The use of convalescent plasma isn't new. In fact, patients in 2003 in Hong Kong received convalescent plasma as a treatment for SARS. As a side note, SARS is just a different type of coronavirus. So it worked well then. So the idea is that hopefully it will work well now. The thing though about convalescent plasma is the clinical data we have at the moment is lacking a little. There was a study in China that only had 5 patients who underwent convalescent plasma treatment, but they also received antiviral therapy as well, which means they received another medication or a few medications maybe that also treat or kill the virus. So we're not really sure how much of an effect convalescent plasma had, if any. So there are 2 important questions about the use of convalescent plasma that we still need to answer. One, will the use of convalescent plasma keep infected patients out of the ICU? Meaning, will it help keep patients who get sick from getting worse? And the other thing, if you have an individual who's infected with COVID-19, will getting treatment with convalescent plasma keep uninfected individuals in the same household from becoming infected? It's really important to know this, because if we can provide an easy and safe method of prevention in the short term while we're waiting for a vaccine to be developed, then awesome. Next is a new antiviral called EIDD-2801. It has that weird name because it is a brand new antiviral. It has not gone to market yet. It was literally just identified and made by a research team at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. The thing about this antiviral is that it would be more of a preventative treatment. Or it could be used to treat patients who were exposed to COVID-19 but aren't showing symptoms yet. The research also suspects that this new antiviral can not only treat COVID-19, but it might be able to help in future coronavirus outbreaks, if there are any. While the research is promising, this new antiviral has only been used in animals, so it's still a while away from being used in humans, with the first clinical trial coming later this spring. So, if those are our short-term options, what's the long-term? Traditional drug treatments that allow the body to fight the infection and make its own antibodies are more effective at providing long-term immunity. This is called active immunity. It's when the body gets infected or gets exposed to an antigen or pathogen, and it can make its own antibodies to fight that infection should it find it again in the future. One of the most widely talked about drug combinations is hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin. Hydroxychloroquine has been around for decades and was actually originally used to treat malaria. It's also being used to treat autoimmune diseases like rheumatoid arthritis and lupus. We're not entirely sure of the mechanism of action that it takes. However, it's thought that hydroxychloroquine can prevent the coronavirus from entering the host cells and infecting it. It does so by disrupting what's called the spike protein, or it might affect the cell surface proteins that the coronavirus uses to identify its potential host. A second benefit is for the ability for hydroxychloroquine to reduce the amount of inflammation and reduce the immune response. Well, why would we want to reduce the immune response if we're sick with something? Part of our body's innate immune system, meaning it's something that we're born with, is to cause an inflammatory response. One of the reasons patients go on ventilators when they get exposed to COVID is because of all the inflammation that they experience in their lungs. It actually can damage cells. So if you can reduce the inflammation, you could potentially reduce the amount of patients who need to go on ventilators, and you can try to reduce the amount of complications that they get from going on said ventilators. Azithromycin was a weird one for me. At first, I wasn't really sure why it was used, but after talking to a pharmacist, he was telling us that azithromycin is an antibiotic, and antibiotics aren't used against viruses. So its purpose is more as what we call prophylaxis, meaning to prevent a future infection or prevent a future outcome. And in this case, it's used to prevent possible pneumonia from any bacterial infections from the suppressed immune system of the hydroxychloroquine. The problem with hydroxychloroquine is that the studies we have on its effectiveness against COVID aren't that strong. The studies that were originally used either didn't have a control group, had too few patients, or both. A larger clinical trial started on April 2nd to determine how effective hydroxychloroquine is in treating this particular coronavirus. Despite the fact that the president is pushing for hydroxychloroquine use, and also because he recently invested in a company that makes hydroxychloroquine, the clinical data is lacking. In fact, one of the commonly cited publications for the use of hydroxychloroquine against COVID-19 was from a French journal. But the society that oversees and publishes the journal has come out and said that they, quote, did not meet the expected standard for research when they initially looked at the study. So when it comes to clinical trials, we want what's called double-blinded, placebo-controlled, randomized study. Really all this means is double-blind, the patient and the doctor don't know what you're getting. Placebo-controlled, it means that you're getting either standard of care, placebo if standard of care doesn't exist, or the actual drug treatment. And randomized, meaning we don't choose who gets what. A computer will randomly determine whether or not a patient is assigned placebo / standard of care or the drug treatment, and neither the doctor or the clinician involved nor the patient know what they're receiving. This is really important because it helps validate the statistical analysis by allowing for removal of the placebo effect, of mitigating the placebo effect, selection bias, and a bunch of other factors. We also need a large sample size to improve statistical power. One of the drawbacks of a small sample size is we don't know, did this happen by chance or did it happen because of the actual treatment the patient received? We need a really large sample size to make that determination, usually in the hundreds, 500, 1,000. I worked in clinical trials for years. There are plenty of times I've seen trials require several hundred patients, 1,500 patients, and sometimes more. And I've also seen studies that only required 300 or 400. But having a sample size of 20 isn't going to cut it when it comes to this kind of drug treatment. So what about vaccines? I'm not going to turn this video into are vaccines safe, because they absolutely are, and I really just want to focus on vaccines and COVID-19. There was actually a vaccine that recently entered phase 1 of clinical trials. It's the fastest a vaccine has ever entered phase 1 testing. However, it still has to meet safety and efficacy endpoints in those phase 1 trials to then go on to phase 2 and phase 3 before being set up for mass production. Sounds like a long process, and it's because it is. Phase 1 studies, their purpose is to primarily determine, is this safe? And then the second thing it looks at is, well, does it work? And then when you go into phase 2 and phase 3, you can add on more questions, but always looking at those first two, is it safe and does it work, as your primary and secondary endpoints. Phase 3 and sometimes phase 2, another thing we look at is it better than receiving standard of care, or is it better than receiving nothing at all? And this is where the placebo effect comes in. The FDA isn't going to approve a new medication that's just as good as what's already out there, but has a worse safety profile, meaning it has more risks. Why would that drug ever come into existence? So we have a lot of testing to do, and Dr. Anthony Fauci, the director for the National Institute of Infectious Disease and Allergies, says we're at least 12 to 18 months away from a vaccine, and I truthfully agree. There are also several questions around vaccines and immunity in general, such as, if I get a vaccine, will I be immune forever? If I get sick and recover from COVID-19, will I be immune forever? And how long will convalescent plasma immunity last? The reality is, we don't know. Some experts think that COVID-19 might be yearly. We might see this strain come around every single year. It's actually kind of similar to the flu or the common cold. Turns out, coronaviruses are responsible for 20% of all common cold cases, which means if you know 5 people who got a cold, one of them, statistically, came from a coronavirus. And it also seems to be that the same 4 coronaviruses come back and get us sick each year, and we really can't stop it. Luckily, it's just a cold or a flu, and the mortality or severity of those aren't very strong. The vaccine might need to be given yearly, like the flu shot, or it could be given every 10 years, like tetanus. We don't know. Enough time hasn't passed yet. What we do know is that prevention is always the best treatment, and you can prevent COVID-19 by staying home. If you have to go out, stay at least 6 feet away from others, and wash your hands frequently. I don't really want to talk about hand sanitizer because 1, can't even find it, and 2, people misuse it, so stick to washing your hands. Let me know your thoughts, and if you hear of any new or upcoming treatments, tell us down below in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit subscribe and leave a positive rating. It's a small thing, but it means a whole lot to us. If you never want to miss a video, be sure to click that bell notification button. And you can also find links to our website, justnascience.com, in the description. From there, you can listen to podcast episodes, read blog posts, get in touch with us, and more. Thanks again for listening. Later, nerds.